Mishmash!
Heya! Today we're doing the third episode of this Quar's War faction focus. In this episode, we're going to be tackling the Western Arnyarans. In my opinion, these guys are probably one of the most unique factions in all of Quar. With their seemingly humble nature masquerading more malicious intent, these guys definitely add a dash of seasoning and spice to the overall setting. Like with the first two episodes, by the way, take a look at them afterwards if you're curious, it'd make me very happy. We're going to be going over their lore, building some of the miniatures, and doing just a little bit of painting. And like always, if you enjoy what you see, make sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe for more videos like this. And if you really dig it, consider becoming a channel member. For just $3 a month, you can see my videos early, and for $5, you get to see a weekly Q&A. Also, if you become a channel member, you get access to exclusive channels within the Mishmash Discord, and in general, it just really helps me out. I just want to extend a huge thank you to my channel members. You guys are amazing. Also, if you're interested in Quar, you can use my affiliate link in the description. It doesn't cost you anything, and it helps me out a ton. But enough about that, let's talk about the Western Arnyarans. So, who are the Arnyarans of the Western breed? Well, before we get to know them personally, I think it's best that we talk about the climate of Western Arnyara first. Of all the places in Allwood to live, Arnyara is furthest from pleasant. Its scant weather, heavily alkaline soil, and generally unstable ground renders much of the country largely inhospitable. But at the same time, we're talking about Quar here. These guys are resourceful, and in my opinion, there are none as resourceful as the Arnyarans. They don't simply live in Arnyara, they thrive there. As you might guess, they're not the farmer-settler type. They're an entire society of nomads, moving place to place as the seasons and local conditions dictate. In essence, these guys are master-class traders. That means two things. As some will dedicate decades of their lives traveling long-established trade routes across the continent. And the technology they utilize to do this is probably the most iconic piece of the entire faction. Their great iron houses. These great contraptions are just as much cabin as they are tractor. Comprised of steel, pig iron, and wood, these slow but reliable mastercrafted behemoths will travel across the entirety of Allwood, often in the form of caravans of merchants, entertainers, and information gatherers. The closest thing resembling towns in Western Arnyara is basically dozens of families and merchants coming and going in their iron houses, and this number constantly fluctuates between the populations. Because of this constant fluctuation in nomadic lifestyle, the culture of Arnyara is relatively unknown to the outside world of Allwood. This is actually a big reason why I like these guys. Being able to live in a giant tractor that's also your house, armed to the teeth, small, tightly knit communities, and if I don't like them, I can just leave, living anonymously and off-grid. Man, they kinda got it figured out. But that's more or less wishful thinking. As I alluded to previously, this is more or less a cloak of sorts. Though they portray themselves with a humble and peaceful nature, there is far more that meets the eye. As you may guess, Arnyarans are very well traveled, and as such, they pretty much act as oracles of sorts. Not only just rumors, their inside scoops and knowledge of gossip and political ongoings is far beyond the average Quar. Now, to take a step back into their history, the eastern portion of Arnyara is actually absorbed by the nation of Creven. To basically cliff notes the history of old Arnyara, the Kit King Rugen IV was crowned at the age of 9 by his father, and he was quickly married off to a noble Dyna from the eastern Arnyara province of Aber. In English, basically a very young king was married off to a woman almost twice his age, and as a result, she became queen and had major political influence over him. Man, stuff like this that makes it hard to be a royalist enjoyer. But basically, she used her influence to benefit her clan, and after she mysteriously died in her sleep, the entirety of Arnyara was in full civil war. Basically, the common folk of the Arnyarans were pushed west. But luckily for them, the Iberians had run out of money, and they had no interest in actually going into the western portion of Arnyara due to the treacherous terrain. During the dying portion of the Civil War, Creven actually offered both the Iberians and the Arnyarans an offer of help. The Iberians weren't exactly interested, although they didn't want to stay in Arnyara, so they decided to form their own sovereign state. The Arnyarans, on the other hand, decided to imprison the Crievish messengers. As time went on, Western Arnyara became Western Arnyara, while Aber became Eastern Arnyara. And like I mentioned previously, Aber or Eastern Arnyara had basically soured every little relationship they had with other royalists, so the nation of Creven decided to invade, and now Eastern Arnyara is part of Creven. Now to kind of fast forward through several decades of history, Western Arnyara and Creven were kinda on terms. They weren't at full-out war, up until Western Arnyara had gotten a little upset with them just kind of waddling into their border without any repercussion. A small skirmish would take place in the act of removing them, though nobody was killed. However, the Crievish court would use this and blow it out of proportion as a means of justifying an invasion into Western Arnyara. Though they would invade, Crievish royalists as well as Arnyaran royalists were actually on pretty good terms, which shockingly led the common folk of Arnyara to grow pretty pissed off with the royalists. Thus, it would lead to the formation of the Foskilde. Essentially, the Foskilde is a shadow government that the Arnyarans use as a means of working outside of royalist rule. They have their own currency, trade routes, weapons, and the aforementioned spies. Quietly, they would train themselves to become an effective fighting force. They would also be able to stay connected while roaming far across Alwood, utilizing their advanced radio network. During this time, they would actually successfully predict the liberation of Tolmor, as well as the formation of the Crusade. And after seeing the Crusade's success, this would prompt them to send coded messages to every stray house that had ventured beyond Western Arnyara. This would be known as the Recall, an operation intended on recalling and regrouping the forces of the Foskilde in a final preparation of war. To everybody else, this would just seem like the Arnyarans wisely trying to get ahead of the war front so they could get home safely. And though I did say that the recall was intended on getting everybody home, several Arnyarans would actually stay behind in a bit of blending into the surrounding countries. And of course, the intention was to keep their information network as long as possible, feeding in information to HQ and the fleeing caravans. Once they had returned home, the Foskilde would actually unite with the Crusade. Prince Raedir, the leader of the Foskilde, would not entirely trust Alakinder, though after extensive research and long-time planning, he did find Campraig Loic to be trustworthy. Thus, an agreement was struck. Mayor Breach would allow the Arnyarans to pass through and attack Creven in a bid of reclaiming their land. In return, they could only attack and reclaim their land and not go any further, as well as launch an assault into Kaftir. The Arnyarans weren't exactly keen on this plan, though Loic would sweeten the deal by allowing him a slice of the potential pie that was Kaftir's seized industrial resources. This seemed like a pretty beneficial plan to both sides, though things would change after Alakinder's death. Though the Crusade had planned to keep this undercover, there was no way of keeping the secret from the Foskilde. Once word had reached Raedir, they decided to take advantage of the upcoming chaos. In essence, they detained all of Loic's men within the Foskilde forces. Once they'd all been detained, they would actually round up everybody for a 6-month early invasion of Creven, all while feeding Loic bad intelligence. During the invasion, they would actually release all of his men and basically just acted like it never happened. Now, the invasion into Creven was highly successful. It was tainted with a bit of controversy. A tactic they had used is strictly forbidden by the laws of war, this being no destruction of property. The iron houses were too damn big and would basically just bulldoze through towns. Mind you, these weren't occupied by civilians, but nonetheless, it's still a violation of the laws of war. Once the Arnyarans had settled into their reclaimed land, they still kept their end of the bargain. In the spring of 1781, they would launch their attack against the walls of Kaftir. At no point in history had either side actually had conflict with one another, so a race had officially begun of each side trying to figure out each other's weaknesses. The Arnyarans would actually breach the wall. Despite the initial success of the surprise attack, along with several casualties on both sides, the Kaftirans would prevail. They would eventually drive off the invading Arnyarans, but at this time, Prince Rhaedir had declared a second push into Creven. They wanted all of it, once again breaking the trust of Loek. While this invasion is currently taking place, the RCEF, or the Kaftiran Expeditionary Force, is actually moving into Creven, and they're working together with the local partisans to fight the Arnyarans. Man, I really do like the Arnyarans in terms of their lifestyle, in terms of their actual weaponry, in terms of their look, in terms of everything pretty much. But I can't deny these guys are pretty devious, and they're pretty conniving. But at the same time, I do understand. Regardless, they are definitely one of the most polarizing factions in the entire setting. And now that I've yapped at you for about 1,000,000 years on the basics of their lore, I think it's about time we do a little miniature building. So moving on to the building section, the miniatures for the Arnyarans are actually in STL form. But this is only temporary. Everything that is in STL form for Quar will eventually get its own physical release. But if you want to get them now, you can get them at myminifactory.com under Josh Qualtieri's tribe. The miniatures are incredibly detailed, but not only with this, we're going to be getting more releases as the month goes on. The Arnyarans come with 3 different head sculpts, and for the first time, we're getting a female Quar, or a Dinah. Now, to assemble these miniatures, we're going to need super glue, and I think they fit together really nicely. Not only this, we actually have 4 different bodies for the base Arnyarans, and I guess 8 if you count the alternative forms. This is just them without the satchel. Now, occasionally there are gaps in the arms, but that's mostly due to my incompetence. If you actually want to fill these in, you can just use some liquid green stuff. It's a super easy fix. Now, the Dinah snouts are actually smaller than male snouts, but if you're like me, I just like having these snouts and different head sculpts so I can change up my different Quar. Not necessarily going for a male or female thing, I just like having different bits so I can change up each individual character. That and their eyeballs are gigantic, so it feels like it'd be really fun to paint them. Now, the weaponry that comes with the base Arnyarans is pretty limited, but that's pretty much like how it is with just about every Rifler squad. As time goes on, more weapons are planned to be released. Altogether, I really do like how these miniatures look. And I actually took the liberty of doing a little bit of kitbashing with the base Arnyaran kit, and I used some Kaftir arms to make some partisans. The coat is pretty universal in its design, so you could really go out and just have a lot of fun kitbashing this body with other pieces. Should also mention too that some of the future releases are going to include the trench raiders and the actual iron houses. In fact, the gun house is actually available now, and I plan on painting that in a future video with pretty much all the tractors that are available. Now, to start the painting process, I highly suggest that you Zenithal Prime the miniature. It's just going to help you in the long run. Now, the first thing we're going to be applying is Rhinox hide, both to the satchel and the trim of the coat. I'm not going to go into detail on painting the leather as I already have a short for that, but we'll go into detail on painting the trim. You'll also want to paint in the buttons. Now for the pants, as well as the neck collar, I'm going to be painting these using dark gray from Vallejo. For all the metallics, I'm going to be painting the gun as well as the helmet using some dark silver. If you wish, you can use a brighter version of the metallic, but I prefer a more grungy color. For the band around the helmet, I'm using some burnt red. For any little buttons on the miniature, I'm painting them using bronze. And to shade the entire miniature, I'm using a combination of Oblivion Black Wash and Battle Mud Wash. Personally, my favorite way to paint them is using brown wash from Procryl and using a black wash on the grays, but this is a more generalistic method. Now, once the wash is completely dry, I would apply a good layering of dark ivory from Procryl all over the jacket. Just leave it out of the recesses, but if you wish to, you can reshade some of these portions and add definition by using just a little bit of that brown wash I mentioned. I strongly suggest that you go in with very thin layers when applying this color. Like I stated previously, I actually prefer the brown wash as a whole over the jacket, as well as a black wash in the metallics and the grays. Either one works fine, I just prefer that method. Now to highlight the metallics, I'm using just a little bit of metallic silver from Vallejo Game Color. And to re-highlight the gray, I'm just using a little bit more dark gray. If you wish to, you can take it a little bit further by adding in just a little bit of white, but personally, I like how this looks. Now to highlight the red band, we're just going to be using a little bit more burnt red, but with just a touch of yellow. And with that final step, the miniature is complete. If you wish to, you can base them however you like, but I decided to go with a little bit of a wintry base. A desolate hellscape seemed fitting considering the natural environment of their home. I just felt the snow would look nice on the base. And with their big wintry coats, it seems pretty fitting. But with that, I think I've definitely flapped my beak enough for one video. The Arnyarans are definitely one of my favorites in terms of the Quar factions. But then again, I feel like I say that with almost every faction. Just means that there's a lot of great factions in Quar. And hey, the next Quar video is more than likely going to be another faction focus, this being the Copterans or the Crusaders. But hey, like always, leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you liked what you saw, share it with a friend, and remember to mishmash Kitbash and paint some fantastic miniatures. And you're gonna, I promise. See ya!